Hello and welcome to Expert Webcast. I'm Alex Kasdan. I'm a Senior Managing Director at Del Morgan & Company and a Senior Advisor to Expert Webcast. And I'm pleased to moderate today's panel on best practices in transactional due diligence. First of all, I hope all of you joining us are well, safe and healthy, you, your families, your friends. And let me introduce today's panel. We've got great speakers. I will start with Jim Davidson, who is Managing Director, President, and Founder of Avant Advisory Group, a management consulting and operationally focused financial advisory firm that focuses on middle market M&A, forensic, fraud, and corporate investigations, operational turnarounds, and financial restructurings. Jim is both a certified merger and acquisition advisor and certified merger and acquisition professional. He is a CPA and chartered global management accountant with multiple financial forensic specialization credentials, and is a certified fraud examiner, certified board advisor, and certified director. Finally, he's both a certified turnaround professional and certified insolvency and restructuring advisor. Jim and Avant Advisory Group provide M&A transaction support and have performed hundreds of buy-side and sell-side diligence engagements that include financial, quality of earnings, operations for companies ranging from distressed to multi-billion-dollar firms. He has been engaged by both counsel and buyers and investors to investigate and opine on numerous forensic and fraud examinations, including post-acquisition issues and disputes. Jim integrates his experience in private equity, public accounting, auditing, and consulting. He serves middle market companies with sales ranging from $25 million to multi-billion dollars in revenue, private equity firms, family offices, their portfolio companies, banks, lenders, and other capital providers, attorneys, and law firms. Jim speaks and writes extensively, including as a frequent speaker on Expert Webcast. And Jim, great to have you back.
Thank you, Alex.
Rob Macklin is a partner at Epiphany Law. Rob is a corporate and M&A lawyer that advises business owners, general counsel, and other key decision makers on mitigating areas of potential conflict for the business and promotes business success. Rob has 17 years plus experience as general counsel of several multi-billion-dollar corporations. He started out as a lawyer at Skadden Arps. And in addition, Rob served as an intelligence officer for the U.S. Navy, working with the Office of Naval Intelligence. He deployed to Iraq as part of a joint task force led by SEAL Team 8. In that role, Rob led the human intelligence collections operation for the team and commanded a detachment of more than 30 sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines. And he received an award from Admiral McCraven for his service in Iraq. It's tremendous experience, and thank you for your service, Rob. And welcome back to Expert Webcast.
Thank you.
Elaine Carey is a managing director at FTI Consulting. She splits her time between LA and the Bay Area. Elaine has served as an advisor and problem solver to senior executives of Fortune 100 corporations and law firms for more than 30 years, overseeing clients' most complex and sensitive problems around the globe involving integrity, political security, operational, and reputational risks. Elaine also co-leads FTI Consulting's cannabis practice. Her experience includes due diligence, fraud, business intelligence, FCPA, anti-money laundering compliance, investigations, cannabis compliance, mining, Latin America, asset tracing, intellectual property theft, and supply chain issues. Elaine has helped corporations identify and work through thorny reputational issues, including environmental, health and safety, labor practice issues, including slave labor and trafficking. Prior to her corporate role, Elaine was an investigative journalist reporting from more than 30 countries on political, economic, business, and social developments, including from Moscow during the fall of the Soviet Union for Cox newspapers. And Elaine, it's great to have you back on Expert Webcast.
Thanks very much, Alex.
Richard Anderson is founder and chief executive officer of ShareVault, an on-demand web application that provides bank-grade security and the highest degree of availability combined with unparalleled speed, ease of use, and functionality. Richard is an experienced Silicon Valley software entrepreneur who has spent the past 20 years bringing innovative business software, e-commerce, and financial services solutions to market. Richard's areas of expertise include product management, sales and marketing, business development, team building, global expansion, information technology, and operational efficiency. He began his career at Apple and was affiliated with a number of other high-tech companies in management roles, including Portfolio Software, E&Y Consulting, where his clients included Netscape, Novellus, Nextel, Infoseek, Market First Software, and eBay. It's great to have you back on Expert Webcast, Richard.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here with you.
Great. So we've got an excellent panel of speakers. Due diligence is an interesting subject matter to me personally, and obviously our audience. We've got a tremendous number of people tuning into this program today. I'll open by saying that it's, everybody's concerned with due diligence. It's often misunderstood, including my experience as a young lawyer. I was a first-year associate, and I was told that I'm going on a due diligence trip. And I said, what is due diligence? Where am I going? What am I doing? Well, you're looking at corporate books and records, and you're talking to people looking for things that stand out. I was a little confused because I didn't know what things that don't stand out are supposed to look for, much less than what things that stand out look like. So I've gotten a little bit more sophisticated since then, but and due diligence is ever evolving. Certainly, one of the things I want to focus on and how due diligence has changed since this whole coronavirus pandemic started, and what it's going to look like post-pandemic. But before we even get to that, I wanted to start by addressing the first question to Jim, as an M&A expert, as a due diligence expert. A deal's being done today.
The quick answer is no. However, we did have one transaction that closed that was really just a formality. It was so far down the road. The valuation was low. The risk was low long term, and so it closed. But other than that, we had, for example, 5 acquirers, potential acquirers, a total of 7 companies being looked at to be acquired with the 5. Not one of them continued on. They've been deferred or permanently terminated. Only a couple of months ago, it was a whole different picture. It was robust, the EBITDAs were high, valuations were high, lots of dry powder. That just changed in a moment. All of those transactions that I mentioned were halted. And I don't know if any of those are going to come back. In fact, the focus changed from acquiring to now monitoring cash flow, cutting costs, focused on internal, both for strategics as well as private equity firms. The last thing anybody was wanting to be concerned with was doing any acquisitions. Everything was internally focused on monitoring the portfolios. I don't think now on timing, we know that it's pretty much shut down right now, but I think that it's going to be a few more months. I don't think it's going to be a V. I don't think it's going to be a W in coming back. It's more than likely going to be a U. And that horizontal part of that U is going to be dependent on how long we are shut down. I do believe it'll come back, but I don't think any earlier than 3 or 4 months, and more likely 5 to 6 months. Once all that SBA money, all that money works its way through the systems, things start to stabilize and everybody is back to work. Things are opened up. Once that happens, and again, I'll say that it could be 4 to 6 months, then I think there's going to be a robust activity. That's where I think that U will start to take place.
Thank you, Jim. Well, let me turn to Rob. You're an M&A lawyer, and I think you actually just closed the deal last week, you said, right?
I did, but I think like Jim said, this one was fairly far down the path. It had already been priced, and we'd started negotiating deal documents when everything shut down. So thankfully we're there, and thankfully we did get the financing pulled.
Yeah, I think, the uncertainty in today's market, and I want to come back to that with Jim and everybody else in this discussion, is that the buyers, sellers, and their advisors, it's very difficult to conclude deals in the period of uncertainty, whether it's financial or otherwise. And, the uncertainty as to what the new normal is going to look like. but the counterbalance to that is that we have, and I was just looking at the numbers on Bloomberg, the estimate is $2.4 trillion in private equity capital waiting to get invested, and $2.2 trillion in strategic capital waiting to get invested. Let me turn to Elaine as an expert in due diligence and investigations. Every deal starts out with a standardized due diligence checklist, whether it's bankers or lawyers, and that list gets modified every once in a while. For example, the obvious things like cybersecurity didn't exist until several years back. Where is the focus of people on due diligence right now?
I think you will see that when the deals do start flowing again, one of the focuses, the key focus will be on supply chain issues. Can you map your supply chain? Can you map it down to the third, fourth, fifth tier, including the raw materials necessary if those are involved? And I think people will be looking for whether or not the members of your supply chain, especially the critical ones, have their own business continuity, crisis management plans. And do you have a plan for dealing with those people? Do you have geographic diversity as well? I think it'll cost you more, but I think people who don't diversify their supply chain between geographic regions that are, say so many people are, almost 100% dependent on Asia, some almost completely on China. I think people will see that is a foolish way to be, that in the long run, that costs you more than having a diverse supply chain with maybe, some manufacturing in Latin America, and also you cut down transport costs if you're in Latin America, particularly Central America or Mexico.
Thank you, Elaine. Let me go to Richard. Your expertise is data, information technology, sharing that data. We may not have the volume of transactions that we have had, pre-pandemic, but there's certain, deals are still getting done. There's still need to share information even outside the deal context. And I know Sherwold is very active in the biopharma and life sciences space. And if there's one industry right now that's going strong, perhaps not in terms of deals, but certainly in information strong, is life sciences. How has that information sharing evolved, sort of the virtual information sharing, and particularly in light of the fact that people cannot communicate face-to-face, cannot travel, cannot meet?
Sure. Yeah, Alex, it's actually, there's quite a bit going on in the life science space and in biopharma. Those companies, we've worked with many of the innovators in the space for a long time. We also work with the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, which is the governing body over the industry. Deals are always happening because those companies have to stay in the market for a very long period of time, and to bring innovation to market, generally through large partners. But I think the level of scrutiny on the innovative assets coming to market is higher now, because I think everyone wants to de-risk their deals. We're also seeing some of our customers signing up for longer-term subscriptions to our system, which indicates that they believe they're going to be in market longer. The other thing we're seeing is companies are taking advantage of some of the other things we offer to help them better secure their information from a cyber risk standpoint. We have some software capabilities that help customers to protect not just what's in the data room, but even the native files, the stuff that's on laptops and servers and in Dropbox and other cloud services, and be able to protect that since a lot of people are working from home, including people who work in biotechs and other life science companies. So there's quite a bit changing. I think it's going to have overall deal volumes will be compressed a bit, but we're still seeing a fair amount of activity in the life sciences space.
Thank you, Richard. I'm looking at a lot of the questions coming in from the audience, and I wanted to remind everybody viewing or listening to this program to submit questions to any of the speakers or to the panel. We'd like to address as many as we can. Let me go back to Jim as an M&A and financing due diligence expert. Well, we don't have too many deals ongoing right now due to the uncertainty in the marketplace, as we talked about a little bit. We probably passed the worst of this pandemic. The states are slowly starting to reopen. I don't think the reopening is going to be, it's not as easy as to turn the lights back on and everybody going back to work sort of pre-crisis. It's going to be very different. It's called the new normal, a term we hear quite a bit. But the transactions will start happening. They're already, there's some deal flow, but certainly that will speed up, if nothing else, because companies, as they're emerging from the pandemic, need capital, need financing. What are the sources of financing that you anticipate will play in the marketplace, especially as in light of the fact that many businesses will be distressed?
If I can, maybe I can describe a situation that we are going through right now. I think that might be a good example of what a lot of companies will be going through in trying to find financing. In this company, we were brought in to assess 3 acquisitions that the company identified. And as part of that process, we started looking at it, but at the same time, doing a sell-side diligence. This is pre-C19. We started doing a sell-side diligence on what we thought was a $5 million EBITDA company. By the time we cleaned up the balance sheet for prior period things, items, it wound up that it was a negative EBITDA. We met with the bank, the existing traditional commercial bank, to explain the situation and where we were going. That bank was all on board, not a problem. We can refinance this within 45 days, the entire thing, and increase it, not an issue. But within 1 week, C19 hit, and it was a total change at that point. At that point, suddenly we needed to have 13-week cash flows, revised projections. There was clear-cut a pullback. It wasn't going to be easy. Fortunately, we were able to do the SBA loans, both of them, the EIDL loan, which emergency injury disaster loan, and the PPP loan. We were able to get them both. We did that immediately, and combined, we're able to get $6.3 million. It changed the whole picture. Now there wasn't no longer a need for a large amount of financing. It changed it from what was a severely distressed situation to one that we're going to be much more aggressive in going forward and doing acquisitions. We now are looking at partnering with a major supplier. We're looking at an expanded relationship with an existing customer and encroaching on competitors who are now weakened by this process. It's going to put us, because of the SBA financing completely obtaining that, we'll be in a far better position to build on that, to build equity, to right-size the company, to do more acquisitions. I think, though, even with that, I think everybody's going to be much more cautious. Subordinated debt is not going to be as difficult, but even on the senior debt, it's going to be less leverage, more conservative structures. That's already, as we're starting to talk with the bank again, down the road for 6 to 9 months, that's what they're telling us. They're going to be much more cautious. They will take more collateral, be much more careful, and analyze the cash flows much more carefully than before. We'll be looking, well, just as a backup, I think this company, but most anybody, will also be looking at direct non-bank lenders and alternative lenders. I think they will come more into play.
Thank you, Jim. And I want to come back to the financing side of things a bit later in the discussion, but I want to turn to Rob as an M&A lawyer and a corporate lawyer. Whether or not the deals that are closing, or when we do gain some degree of certainty as to what's going on in the economy, the quote unquote new normal again, I think, and looking at some of the numbers that are being published, maybe 30 to 35 to 40% of the people will continue working remotely for various reasons. So a lot more things are going to be, you're still going to have to do virtual diligence, and many of the things that you could do in person will continue to be done virtually. As an M&A lawyer, can you do virtual diligence? Can you do remote due diligence?
I think you can. I think it starts to get tough doing it purely remote. That said, I think if you look back, let's say 20 years ago, right, there was no such thing as a virtual data room, more or less, right? We would still look through boxes. As a lawyer, first year lawyer, Alex, you certainly were like, you'd go look through boxes of paper and you'd sit down. Perhaps we'd look at things today and we would say, hey, that initial management presentation, can we do that virtually? Probably so. And a lot of the data that we will collect and analyze will still continue to be done in virtual data rooms. Perhaps we won't have quite as many in-person meetings. Maybe there will be Zoom meetings on sort of that initial data gathering. But I think the real kind of nitty-gritty stuff as you get down to towards the end and you really need to sit across the table from someone and look them in the eyes and understand, hey, can this person help me run the company going forward? Is that person going to leave? Those sorts of things. I think that still does benefit to a huge extent from in-person exposure. Certainly we could spend a lot of time talking about, how to monitor body language and things of that nature as we look to that. But I think that when I think about what can be done virtually, it's probably about 85 to 90% of that diligence. But to have an effective process, there still needs to be that human touch. And I think perhaps rather than doing a 70-30 split in the past, maybe it's more like an 85-15 or 90-10. And I think we could still get to the same answers. We'll just have to be more thoughtful about when we go on site, how we go on site, and who we talk to. My worry would be the lack of kind of hallway conversations, the ability to chat with, the CEO secretary, for instance, right? It can be oftentimes be a great source of information, or sort of listening in on the water cooler talk, those sorts of things where you're having interactions with folks that aren't being kind of set up or prompted by the seller if you're on the buy side, for instance. That will be probably harmed a little bit. So we'll have to be a little more cognizant about how we ask our questions. But I think you could certainly run it as an effective diligence process, with this kind of a 90-10 or 85-15 split as you were in the past.
Right. Now, we talked a little bit before about sort of how often you find out information that is very, very relevant outside the sort of the conference room formal setting.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, when we were, if I can just borrow something from we did in the Navy, right? When we were looking at investigating terrorist networks, if you've watched any of the Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy stuff, right? The classic person you go after is not the bad guy first. You're going to go after the messenger. You go after the person that provides the points of connections, that provides that information. And oftentimes you get better information from the person that's not being structured and set up to talk to you. It's the secretary, it's the lower level engineer, it's the person that's taking you on the factory tour because the head of global manufacturing doesn't want to be bothered to do yet another factory tour. So perhaps it's someone 2 levels down that's going to take you on that factory tour. That tends to be where you get those tidbits, and that's where you can learn those things you would otherwise never learn.
Great point. And I want to come back to you, Rob, on how that, so the change in the way the deal is being done, due diligence or the process, how that may affect the deal structures.
Sure.
And the financial terms. But that's a good segue though to go to Elaine, because you're an expert on sort of, how should we say, people diligence, software aspect of diligence, not so much the numbers, right?
Correct.
How can you do that aspect of diligence remotely? Because that's what Rob and I were just talking about, or Rob was talking about, sort of the water cooler or sort of more informal discussions, more informal investigations. Can that be done remotely?
Yes, by and large, we can still do all that no matter where it is in the world, sort of thing. So we use the same sort of intelligence gathering process where we have our extensive networks because we all come from different backgrounds, and we find people to talk to well beyond the obvious targets, and you begin talking to people and they lead you to other people. We have talked to people, for example, who obviously have left a company, and it's pretty clear from what you read that it was acrimonious, but then we talk to that person and they say, well, I can't say anything because I signed a confidentiality agreement. And we have literally had people say, but my spouse didn't sign that. And there might be some things that person can tell you that you should know before this deal. And so there are all sorts of ways that people pop up and tell you. I've even had board directors say, feed us information, or at least say, you know who you should talk to is person XYZ. And they purposely lead us towards that person because they know that that person can tell us about something that is not kosher, that's not good, that you should know about before a deal closes. So we have a lot of ways to begin to elicit that. And of course, we're professional interviewers. I won't say interrogators because we don't, that would kind of scare people off. And so it's amazing what people will still tell you in many countries. Now, sometimes in some places in the world, you still have to show up in person. We've often, for example, you're talking about, walking sites. We still send people out to, say, factories in China and make sure they're actually there where they say they're there, and watch them take the product out the back door because it's actually being made, 2 streets away under conditions that violate any OSHA regulation you've ever thought of, as a fire trap, et cetera, or in places where they have underage people doing the work. So all those are issues that we can discover. Sometimes we just have someone go out and talk to the guard at the gate, and they'll tell you all sorts of things. If you know how to chat someone up nicely, they'll tell you all sorts of things.
Alex?
Certainly interesting. Go ahead, Jim.
I just thought I'd jump in, just a little bit different view, but it's because of our focus. Elaine and Rob's an attorney. Elaine is looking at a lot of background investigations and a lot of public data and things like that, whereas where our focus is primarily in the quality of earnings and the operational side of the business. For doing that, I feel like we need to skew the amount of on-site, at least 50%, maybe not 15%, where maybe legal could be more oriented towards that. That would be a very risky for us, I think. Although I know that I've seen our competition say that they could do 90% or 100% remotely. I'm fearful of that because of the amount of forensic engagements we do, post-transaction failures, fraud investigations. I'm really leery about doing that. Let me give you an example. I'll give you one. I have many, but I'll give you one quick one. Before this even occurred, a year and a half ago, we were confined to a very limited, mostly remote diligence by the investment banking firm. And it felt very uncomfortable through that process. We were only allowed to speak to the equivalent of the CEO, the controller, the CFO, and a couple of high-level top management team. Everybody there was on the same page. When we did the transaction and closed it, we had not had the opportunity to talk to anybody else. And by the way, the meetings were done off-site at a hotel. That was a red flag, but we proceeded with the transaction. After the diligence, after the transaction closed, we got a chance to speak to all the operations people, the warehouse, the accountants who dig down into the company. We found significant items that were not as they had been portrayed. That resulted in litigation that has gone on for over a year now. So that is one major concern. That's a recent. That was done not because of the virus or because of remote. It was just controlled by the seller. I would be very cautious because we've identified so many things on site where we can read expressions and we can triangulate with different people. We can have different people separated. And many, many times, that is not many times, but oftentimes those in-depth conversations will result in something that we never would have been able to obtain remotely. So I would just raise a level of concern about doing a diligence remotely, just like I'd raise a concern for a buyer to do the complete evaluation remotely. You have to be on site. You have to meet the people face to face. As a seller would, I think, as in doing an appropriate due diligence, I think you do too.
And Jim, that's an interesting point and a good segue to Richard, because Richard, you're in the virtual diligence space.
Yes.
And question just came in actually. Given the less personal interaction, the ability to kick the tires, so to speak, how has your business changed and what sort of bells and whistles have you added to the ability to do more effective due diligence virtually?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, Jim mentioned, quality of earnings assessments, and they often are accompanied by quality of operations assessments. And I think all that information, the buyers are wanting to get more information up front. So as they go and if they have the opportunity, whether it's virtual through video or ultimately to be able to go on site, they want to be really well equipped to ask those probing questions. And one other thing, it's kind of a long-term trend that we've seen is that potential acquirers want to have access to a financial model that they can really work with. And I think it's because, comps and all those, that some traditional measures are so much in flux that the acquirer wants to be able to run a discounted cash flow, test, develop their assumptions, build their model, and then go and test that against, what they can learn from talking with the company themselves. And so I think, and the seller, on the other hand, or sellers, they want to make sure that they have, they can bring in favorable comps to their benefit whenever they can. So I think there's kind of a couple things vying here. Definitely an intense desire to get more information, have it readily available for the buyer to do their analysis, as well as for the seller to try to estimate where the buyer's going. And so they probably should run their own DCFs and try to, if they end up in a DCF-oriented conversation around cash generation, try to drive up towards some favorable comps in the negotiation. So from a software standpoint, what we're doing is we're providing higher fidelity mechanisms in the platform to allow the seller, let's say, to share really, really granular information with the buyer, but yet not lose control of it. So that would be an Excel model that is still under control, but could be handed over to the prospective buyer, so they could really dig in and do their DCFs and their all their forecasts and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a lot of front-end loaded analysis to sum it up, and then the requirement for the requisite tools to do that well, all in anticipation of being able to go deeper with the conversation at whatever time allows or whatever tools allow it.
Thank you, Richard. Let me go back to Rob then on that. So as you mentioned, things evolve. 20 years ago, we didn't have virtual data rooms. I remember putting in every piece of paper in a separate manila folder and setting them up in a credenza somewhere in a conference room. And that's how deals got closed. Don't do that anymore. Professionals' behaviors, attitudes change. The big issue here is that they had to change overnight, right? With sheltering in place, we have no more personal meetings. And that's not evolution. That's sort of abrupt and overnight change. Given sort of what we have to play with in the environment that we're in for the foreseeable future, and sort of the imposed change that was imposed on all of us, are you, as an M&A lawyer, going to advise your clients differently than you would have pre-coronavirus crisis in terms of deal structuring, whether it's the way the transactions are structured, payment terms, earnouts, things of that nature, given that maybe that 70-30 or whatever that virtual versus physical due diligence split is now 90-10?
Yeah, I think if you kind of step back, Alex, I'd say if you go back to, let's say, you go back 30 years, right? Deal terms that we would have thought of, we would have seen, as far as your holdbacks, your escrow amounts, the reps and warranties, things of that nature, right? We're generally more, I would say, kind of buyer friendly than they are today, right? So, when I started, if I saw 30% escrow or 25% escrow, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. If I saw a 36-month or 60-month period on reps and warranties, wouldn't have thought twice about it. As things progressed and private equity got into the space, you started to see deals that were being done with a fair bit more certainty than they had in the past. So smaller escrows, shorter reps and warranties, quicker diligence, sort of the emphasis on getting deals done and making transactions happen. And the deal that I just closed had an effective escrow of 7.5%. As we come, let's say, into the fall and deals start getting done again, I can see a situation where legal teams and financial teams are going to start perhaps backing up and wanting more in escrow, wanting longer periods of time, utilizing as an excuse, whether it's an excuse or like a real rationale, that they weren't able to do as much diligence as they would have in the past. Therefore, they're going to need more comfort. Perhaps that's going to be acceptable to sellers, Perhaps it's not. I can see perhaps an increased role for reps and warranty insurance in this context. But if I were to sort of say, what I would say is maybe not a revolution in how deals are getting done or deal documents, but perhaps we start to creep back more towards more comprehensive reps, longer escrow periods, longer time periods to allow kind of in a sense, not really, but in some sense you could think about it as a post-closing diligence of some mindset that will provide comfort. As Jim was talking about, things that you learn after you close the deal. If I can't go talk to your assistant controller, I'm not going to be as comfortable giving you, a smaller escrow amount. I'm going to want some more money retained so that I can figure something out, post-closing. If I had to guess, that's how I'd say it would go. But we'll have to wait and see come early 2021, late 2020 as to how things are going to move.
Agreed. And with a caveat, I think that many private companies, family-owned companies, sell due to sort of non-business circumstances, health, divorce. What have you. I think it's going to take quite a while in general for the sellers to come to terms with the new market environment on both valuations and the deals that are getting done.
I think that's right. I mean, you and I have talked about it, Alex. Most private companies every 5 years or so, vast majority of them get an unsolicited offer, and we represent a number of clients where, they've been thinking about selling for the last 3 or 4 years. Well, you've lost your chance, right? You're going to be in this another 3 or 4 years before you get a chance easily to get back to the multiple that you would have had last fall. So I think you're absolutely right. Sellers are going to have to adjust to a different normal. And if they're pressured to sell because of family issues, heart attack, whatever it's going to be, they're probably going to be in for a bit of an awakening that they won't, rude awakening they won't like very much.
No, I think that's exactly right. As a banker, I'm getting a lot of calls on valuation. I mean, the honest answer is I don't know what the valuation is. But all I can tell you for the fact is that certainly it's not going to be, 10 to 14 times EBITDA from 3 months ago.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. So definitely new normal. In terms of the new normal, I think there's going to be quite a shift of focus in M&A to more distressed deals, corporate non-core asset sales by corporations, things of that nature. And I want to go to Elaine with the next question. Every business, every distressed deal, every cause of distress is now coronavirus, COVID-19. I spoke to a company where the EBITDA went from double digits to negative, and it was all blamed on COVID-19, but it didn't really happen overnight. How do you really separate sort of the cause and effect and the truth from fiction as to why some of these companies are distressed?
Yeah, when situations like this happened in 2008 too, with the financial crisis. A lot of people, there was a rush to do deals when things sort of lightened up, and a lot of people used that as the quote unquote excuse. And so again, that's where we dig down deep, looking at people, looking at what's in the public record, what was going on before in great detail, rather than accepting their word that it was COVID-19 that caused a sudden crash in their numbers. And the more you talk to people, then you begin to pick up on that. Did they have a lot of layoffs before? Go talk to those people who were laid off and figure out what was going on. The other thing about when you come back into these deals, I think we're going to see a huge rush. That's also when the fraudsters come out big time, because everybody will be in a hurry to get some deals done, and they count on that. So they try to hide in that rush and take advantage of it. So anytime the lawyers come to me and say, oh, we've got this great deal and it's, but they're pushing to do it in a hurry. And I always say, who's pushing to do it in a hurry and why? Don't often get an answer, but sometimes they'll say, oh, well, it's this particular person. And so we really scrutinize that person, because there's going to be, more often than not, there's going to be an answer why that person is pushing so hard to do it in a hurry. And the other question I always ask is, is there a middleman? Is there someone who's introducing this deal or suggested it to you or whatever, to either side, the buyer or the seller? Because sometimes those people have the nefarious agenda in some way that's not readily apparent, but they've got something going on that tells you that this deal may not be good in the long run.
I always thought it was lawyers and bankers that pushed the deals to close in a hurry.
No, everybody pushes them, but it always makes me nervous when people say that. I was like, yeah. Right.
Now, there's always a reason why somebody is pushing that, I suppose. let me turn back to Jim as a financial due diligence expert. You talked about quality of earnings a little bit. Forgetting the quality, we have no idea what the earnings are going to look like for many of these companies. We don't know what the projections will look like. We don't even know what the underlying assumptions are. So how do you do financial analysis at this point?
Boy, that is one tough question and one big challenge. That's exactly why one of the big reasons why I think it's going to take a while for things to clear. It's hard to project. We're doing it right now, and we're doing it with multiple scenarios, multiple sensitivities and risk factors. It's not easy right now. We don't have a lot of clarity on in this case for a consumer products company when it's going to come back. But I can tell you that we're doing not the 13-week or 90-day cash flows. We're doing it out 6 months. That's probably the biggest one. The biggest factor that's going to impact valuation are cash flows. What's the timing and what's the risk? And right now, to be honest, we have almost no clarity. We've done a ton of these, and this is one of the worst times to be able to get clarity when people are going to go back to work, when the economy is going to be opened up, and what are going to be the changes in consumer behavior. But the key is for determining what those valuations are, what the structuring is going to be, it's going to be cash flows. The only thing I can say is what we're doing. We're extending out the cash flow analyses from 13-week to 26-week, 1. 2, we're doing multiple models and varying it based on timing and the riskiness that we see based on geography, product lines, and customers. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the best I have, Alex.
It does, but in the period of this kind of uncertainty, you typically start seeing more fraud, sort of more, bed reps, things like that. Are you seeing that at all in the transactions you're looking at right now?
Well, one of the core areas that we do are fraud examinations. And knowing from history, there hasn't been any activity right now for us to be able to say that that's going to happen. But I assure you, and I think Elaine's going to agree with me, that there's likely very high probability based on history to be much more fraud. And for 2 reasons. One is there's more opportunity because of the lack of controls, lack of scrutiny on the operations of companies right now during this time. That's one. And because of that, there's more opportunity for fraud to take place. Secondly, just like in every other recession, it's almost like when the tide goes back, you can see the garbage, the rocks down below. When the tide's high, you can't see what's down there. It's lower now, so you can see what might have already been taking place all the time. But it definitely surfaces in times like where we're at now. Greater opportunity and greater incentive to do fraud. So I expect the answer is, haven't seen it right now, but we will.
Elaine, would you like to comment on that? That's one of your areas of expertise.
Yeah, I think you'll also see a lot of fraud in the loans that people take from the government. They'll misuse those. We saw those after Katrina. We investigated a lot of those. You'll see that they've misused them for other things that have been, they've lied on their applications or at least fudged them. So it's always a time that you get a lot of fraudsters that come out and infiltrate, partly because companies will be, they may have gotten some money from the government there, but they may still be desperate, particularly if we get a second wave of COVID-19 and things shut down again or don't fully open. People get desperate and they'll take the first person that comes along and hey, I can get you some money and don't ask too many questions. And so, yeah, I think you'll see that in the aftermath, and understandably the government's done the loans in a hurry, et cetera, which is probably the right thing, but there is going to be just a heap of fraud in there.
Yeah, Alex, I can jump in on that too. I think, what Elaine and Jim mentioned, certainly outright fraud, but also from the kind of strategic context, I can see a lot of, call it creeping fraud, little tiny steps by otherwise honest people to justify things over time, right? It's just a little bit. I just need to get past this next month, or I just need to make this one tweak to my numbers, or it's just this one product I need to get clearance for, and we're just we'll fix it later, right? It'll come back. We'll clean it all up in 2 months when everything's over. Well, when you have bad times, sometimes things don't come over. So now 2 months from now, I need to make a tiny other adjustment again. And so I think you see, particularly in a strategic context, a lot of folks will just end up taking little bites at the apple, and all of a sudden they turn around and they've eaten the entire thing, and they're in a really bad spot.
Well, Rob, Elaine brought up an interesting issue, and you start seeing a lot more being published on this, right? When the dust sort of settles and the government realizes that, a lot of money, when they actually have time to look at the money that's been given out, and right now, what is it, 4 trillion? I mean, crazy numbers, unprecedented in history. There's going to be a lot of investigations and a lot of sort of gave you a lot of money, but show us the supporting documentation. Yep. As an M&A lawyer in advising companies, I assume that's going to come up as one of the risk factors, right? So both the sell side and the buy side.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, definitely that'll be something to look at as you go forward, where that money was utilized. And I think what will be interesting is you're going to have to make some independent risk assessments about how the government will behave, right? Because as this kind of flows through the system, a lot of the decisions that the AUSAs or the Department of Justice is going to make, they aren't going to come up until 2022, 2023. And when you have this much money pushed this fast with, perhaps good intentions, perhaps not on the side of the government, it doesn't really matter. The regulations are always a bit gray. And so now you're going to have to make a bet. If you want to do a deal at the end of 2020, a company got a $7 million PPP loan, you're going to perhaps have to make a bet as to what an assistant U.S. attorney is going to think in 2022 when that person decides to prosecute or not prosecute this company. And so you're not only trying to read the law, but you're going to try to read the sort of post-closing enforcement mechanisms, which is always difficult. Now, a lot of lawyers that sort of practice in regulated industries, healthcare, whatever, have done a lot of that. But this is all so new, there will be some uncertainty, which is why I think we'll go back to seeing perhaps longer tails on reps and warranties and bigger escrows just for that reason.
I think that's right, particularly as we talk about this 2.2 or roughly $1 trillion of strategic money. The last thing you want to do as a large strategic acquirer buy a smaller company and find out that it was fraud in obtaining government funding.
Yeah, absolutely. That $17 million purchase that you made is going to cost you $35 million to fix it. That's a bad spot for your CEO to have to explain to his or her stockholders.
Right. But that's also where you see people skip the due diligence because they say, oh, it's such a small buy, it's not material to the overall, but it's the one that can come back and really bite you.
I might add, Alex, just to add a comment, I think it's incumbent upon any companies that are receiving these loans to think in advance about investigations or diligence processes and do things to keep very good accounting of all the proceeds from any of those, whether it's government loans or sources of financing from anywhere, so that they really can make it easy for any counterparty, whether it's a public authority or whether it's a potential acquirer, to understand that, let's say, for example, the payroll loan came in, put it in a separate bank account so that, it's fully tracked and it's allocated 100% towards payroll, so that you don't have to go back and justify that after the fact, just to keep a real clean story around these capital flows.
That's a great point. Another question came in for you, Richard. I think you track a lot of deals and facilitating due diligence, and sort of right in the midst of many deals. Are you seeing due diligence cycles become longer, or actually they'll be much more? The due diligence will become much more abbreviated when we go back to normal, given the pent-up demand?
Yeah, it's a little early to tell how the cycles are going to go, although as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing more of our customers, which oftentimes use our platform for due diligence. It's used for other things as well, but oftentimes it's due diligence. I'd say most often sign up for longer contracts than they used to. So it seems like they're planning to stay in the market a little bit longer. That's one early indication. And I think also our customers are taking more advantage of our expertise in terms of setting up their data room to take advantage of responding to multiple buyers, for example, and there's a way to do that so that they can cater to each buyer's independent due diligence checklist without having to duplicate the data room every time. And there are ways to do that. There are also techniques to handle cross-border deals. So I think we're seeing our customers who are setting up data rooms investing a lot of time on doing a really good job structuring it. And I seem to believe that indicates they're going to be at it for a while and want to make it go as absolutely smoothly as possible and not bet on too much time working against them.
Great. Thank you, Richard.
Alex?
Let me go back to Jim. Yep.
Well, I was just going to chime in to say that I do think that the sellers are going to want more time to get that visibility on cash flows, as I mentioned. But the buyers, if they're not distressed, I think they're going to want to push to try to recover values. And you talked about it earlier, that there's a disconnect from where it was. It's going to take time to readjust the valuation expectations from the seller standpoint. But what will happen for those companies that cannot survive, they don't have the luxury of pushing out, waiting for more valuation, for the valuation to increase. For those, there will be a lot more Article 9s or out-of-court restructurings. And by their very nature, they have to be done faster. So you can almost, it's almost like separate transactions. Those that are relatively healthy, but maybe not at full valuation, maybe a little bit more time. But the distressed, such as out-of-court restructurings and Article 9 transactions, they're going to be very fast by their nature. They have to.
Thank you, Jim. And actually, to follow up on that, a question came in just for you, talking about, and you started talking about the considerations and variations in modeling cash flows. What assumptions are you using? Because everything is a little bit up in the air right now, including, we're fundamentally a consumer-driven economy. What the consumers are going to do when we come out of this?
Well, that's why I mentioned we do not have a good model. I don't think anybody does. You really have to model it with different scenarios. We don't know what's going to happen with the consumer. It will be down and it'll take time to ramp up. So we're using different models and different levels of sensitivity, where we might have used 3 before. We might have said best case or optimum case, most likely, and worst case. Now we're doing it many different variations and many different sensitivity factors, but there is no one size fits all for this. That's about the best I can, and we're right in the midst of it. We're having a very tough time trying to figure it out, what those assumptions would be.
Great, thanks, Jim. Let me go back to Rob. One of the areas, as an M&A lawyer, one of the areas we really haven't touched on is cybersecurity. And that has become a pretty big issue. Obviously some pretty high profile, examples in M&A where, deals fell apart because buyers bought what didn't get what they thought they were getting. The seller was selling something that they didn't own, to put it bluntly. And that really hadn't trickled very much to more middle market transactions, right? It's just sort of out there. People pay some attention to the buyers do and the sellers do, but it wasn't really a big area of concern. It's become a much bigger area of concern now with everybody working remotely. Mm-hmm. We're frankly, many of the companies have no crisis preparedness or sort of contingency planning. And when you got your employees working from home with, have no idea whether they have any sort of cyber protection, Wi-Fi passwords for that matter. Right?
Yep.
How do you deal with that aspect going forward as an M&A lawyer?
I think just simply being cognizant of it is huge. And what I mean by that is I think there was for a long time a tendency to say, well, that's a tech company. Cybersecurity is critical. That's not a tech company. Cybersecurity isn't critical. And I think if you realize that, hacking attempts or cybersecurity issues, it's not the equivalent of like some mastermind sitting behind a computer in a basement somewhere specifically targeting an individual company. It's more about, kind of virtually walking up and down the street looking for the unlocked door and popping your head in. That's where it becomes critical. So certainly the M&A deals that I have done in the last, let's call it 6 to 7 years, the IT, whether at a strategic, certainly when I was in strategics, the IT team was a critical part of the diligence team, and it had one of the lead roles in what we were handling. And then as I moved to a law firm, bringing in IT specialists, if our clients don't actually have competent IT folks internally, bringing in an IT specialist to handle that is utterly critical. You know, as a lawyer, I can write a rep around it, and I can kind of do a high level estimation, and I can certainly help you with how to handle your communications plan or communications with various government agencies if there's a hack on the back end. But actually doing that assessment is a critical component, and it's critical for every company. And frankly, just talking to your clients if you're an advisor, and getting them to understand that just because perhaps they sell, you know, hardware in Oregon somewhere and they're a $15 million company, you know, that's still relevant to them because they do have consumer data, they do have credit cards, they are still subject to a hack. And that will materially impact their value from a reputational perspective, regardless of whether or not it was their fault or not.
Right. No, that's a huge issue. And Elaine's from FTI has a pretty strong capability in cybersecurity, I believe.
Yeah, and business email compromise was something big anyway before everybody started working from home. And so, and people forget that you know, a business email compromise doesn't have to be of the CFO, et cetera. It can be anybody, and then they work their way through the system.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, they can steal customer data, credit card data, but they can also steal, you know, strategic plans and your marketing information and all sorts of things that maybe the particular hacker isn't going to use, but he's going to go out there somewhere probably on the dark net and sell it.
Yeah.
And of course you can't leave out, you know, nation state actors that do that sort of thing that quite frequently, whether it's Russian or Chinese or.
And certainly you have to expand that diligence beyond the company itself, right? I mean, if we look at, you know, first kind of big hack that we can remember from a major consumer company, the Target hack, right? The hackers there came in through the HVAC company. And they were in Target systems for 2.5, 3 weeks before anybody found out anything. And it was a phishing scam from an HVAC contractor that was at one of the Target stores that got them access to that network. So, you know, when I was actually general counsel, we would diligence our law firm's cybersecurity. Like that was a major component of RFPs that we ran. And some people got it and some people didn't, but certainly you have to extend that out to your vendors as well.
It's a great point. And going back to Elaine, another big point is I think is that many, especially when times are tough and people need capital, need money, and maybe looking for buyers, what they don't pay attention to is who the buyers are. And they get an offer of capital, whether it's debt or equity, they're elated the deal is getting done. They perhaps have a buyer coming in with a good offer. They're elated that there's an offer on the table. How important is it to do the diligence from the seller's perspective on who the buyers are and what the source of funds are?
It's extremely important because there's all sorts of risk that comes with that. Some of it's just reputational risk. You sell to the wrong person and then you find out that they're related to some sort of terrorist group, or so you help finance them, or organized crime. I had someone come to me recently. They were going to sell an asset, fairly large asset, and the question was almost casual. But then when I looked at it very quickly and without actually putting together a full project, I said, you know, this is based in Cyprus. And this particular person is very close to Putin. So do you want to wake up in the morning and read that on the Wall Street Journal that you sold to these people? Especially when there could be any hint of dual use of whatever the asset is. That's just not a place you want to be. So, I mean, people don't think about that very often, but there is a great downside. And of course, in a market like this, you don't know where the money's coming from. I've got another one going on as a small business. Looks like someone's trying to take them over. And the person that offered the money, you know, that person has no assets himself, but he's supposed to be, supposedly has his own fund, but doesn't own his own house, hasn't for a long time, doesn't even own a car. I'm like, nah, this doesn't ring right to me. Where the money's coming from might be a dirty place.
And again, that's probably particularly a relevant consideration for larger companies selling non-core assets. As Rob was talking about before, you know, for a relatively small deal, the cost and the brain damage and the PR damage from a government investigator is just not worth it.
Yep.
I don't know if you've seen the statistics, but one of the other industries, quote unquote, that have been hit have been drug traffickers and organized crime. they're shut down. So you can't, they're scrambling too. They're going to find ways to get into the system if they can't do the ordinary way, which is just bringing loads of cocaine up or whatever it is. But they're hurting too, and obviously they don't play by the rules when they try to launder their money through the system. So, and this kind of chaos is good cover.
Interesting point. We're actually at the top of the hour, but I wanted to give each of the speakers an opportunity for any sort of leave behind thoughts or any takeaways from this discussion or anything that we should have talked about but didn't get a chance to. I'll start with, how about you, Richard, as the expert?
Sure, thanks, Alex. Yeah, since we're managing and supplying a service that is on the internet and subject to cyber risk, we have to monitor that very carefully and manage around it. And Elaine mentioned also the supply chain and how important it is to have great knowledge and optionality in your supply chain. I think that also portends to cyber risk. And we're seeing companies want to make sure that the suppliers around the world are securing their systems appropriately, and even to the point where our customers can control the native files that they've given to supply chain partners to make sure that they aren't subject to industrial espionage in a foreign country, for instance, or that imagine it could be an AutoCAD file that's used to actually manufacture a part and finish the design to make that part ready for manufacturing. The owner of that IP wouldn't want that to fall in the wrong hands and would like the ability to retract it. Those capabilities are becoming increasingly important, I'd say, in the supply chain. And I think just holistically, if you look at any company, you want to make sure that you're controlling your own documents everywhere they are, and drawing as tight as possible perimeter around your organization and around your suppliers, so that they're not, with all these things changing and people moving to remote work and everything, it becomes much more porous. So taking the time, and I think Rob mentioned that they actually did internal reflective audits on what are they doing within their firm. That's very healthy, and I think that all companies would benefit from that, because ultimately it means you can continue to run a viable business with less risk, and hopefully get to, whenever the opening in the market allows, a great exit. Great,
thank you, Richard. Let me go back. Let me go to Jim as the financial restructuring and due diligence expert on the panel.
I just have a couple of takeaways, Alex. One is it will come back, and it will come back robust. But it may be that's the question. The sooner we can get back to work, open up this economy, I think it'll take off. But the longer it's out there, we got to worry about that bottom length of that bottom of that U. The most important thing, I think, though, that I would take away is that don't shortcut the diligence. Remember, cash flows are risky. The timing is risky. It's going to affect valuation. Scrutinize it deeply, and especially given that fraud is more prevalent in downtimes, focus on that as well. Diligence is just as important, if not more important, than ever before.
That's agreed. Thank you, Jim. Let me go to Elaine as an investigative expert on the panel.
So I'm, paid to be paranoid, and usually it pays off, as well as profile. And I would go back to the Russian proverb that Reagan borrowed, trust but verify, and verify every part of the deal as far down as you can, up and down and sideways, before you do them. And the new deals that are going to come rushing in are going to need a lot of that.
Thank you, Elaine. And let me go to Rob as the M&A and corporate lawyer and former general counsel on the program.
Yeah, I think I'll echo what everyone else just said in particular. And I think to a point that Jim had earlier, it's maybe tougher to do the kind of quality diligence that we are used to in the past. But when things are shut down, we can't do in person. But there was a kind of a U.S. military saying that was, quality or quantity has a quality all its own, right? So even though we can't do quality diligence the way we'd like to, the amount of diligence that we do, the repetition, asking the same question of multiple people in a lot of different ways, is really kind of one way to help backstop the fact that we maybe can't get the same quality that we'd like to. but ramping up your quantity and not shortchanging yourself in these times is going to be critical.
Thank you, Rob. And I would just like to add to that as investment bankers that chaos creates opportunities. And I know people whose business may have been shut down for the last month or so due to the shelter in place may not want to hear this, but it does create opportunities because there may be acquisition opportunities down the road to acquire some of the competitors. And now in this slow period, maybe the time to think about what transactions are on the horizon in addition to how to get your business through this period. And I would just encourage everybody, again, due diligence is very important. And whatever transaction you're doing as a seller or buyer, to surround yourself with experts, people that have done this before and may have seen different downturns, different cycles. So while this one is unprecedented, you can still sort of focus on the lessons we've gotten from the previous recessions and previous cycles. With that, I want to thank all the speakers for putting together a great presentation. I would encourage everybody listening or viewing this program to reach out to the speakers afterwards, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.